All right, so we're diving into super empathy today.
Sounds intriguing, right?
Definitely is. But before we get to the super part, can anyone actually develop these super empath traits?
Okay.
Or is it just something you're born with?
That's a really good question to start with.
Yeah?
It gets to the core of why this whole concept is so fascinating.
Okay.
Let's start by breaking down the types of empaths that the source talks about first.
Okay.
We've got normal empaths, Heyoka empaths,
Okay.
Sigma empaths, and of course, super empaths.
Right, and we're going to focus on the super empaths today.
That's right. But getting a sense of that whole spectrum really helps to put things into context.
Gotcha. So it's like levels of empathy.
Yeah, you could think of it that way.
Okay.
Each type has its own unique way of experiencing and processing emotions.
Okay, so what makes each type distinct then?
Well, normal empaths, as you might guess, they feel the world's emotions really deeply.
Okay.
Sometimes it's even to the point of being overwhelmed. Imagine feeling the collective joy of a huge concert crowd.
Oh, yeah.
Or even the anxiety of like rush hour traffic.
Oh, gosh.
You know, it can get pretty intense.
Yeah, I can see how that would be both amazing,
right,
but also completely exhausting.
Absolutely. Now, Heyoka empaths, they're really interesting.
Okay.
They often use things like humor and kind of like unconventional behavior to challenge social norms and make people think a little differently.
Interesting.
Think of like a friend who can always find the humor
Right.
in any situation and who's not afraid to call out hypocrisy.
Uh-huh.
That's kind of a classic Heyoka empath in action.
Oh, I like that. So they're like the trickster archetype
Exactly.
of the empathy world.
Yeah, kind of like shaking things up.
Okay, and what about the Sigma empaths?
Now, they're the ones who really need their solitude to recharge.
Okay.
They might be incredibly perceptive and deeply feeling, but they also really need that space to process all of that emotional input.
Makes sense.
Okay.
So where do the super empaths fit in with all of this? Are they like the most sensitive out of all of these types?
Not necessarily. It's not just about like the intensity of their sensitivity.
Okay.
It's more about this really unique way that they combine that sensitivity with strength.
Oh.
They have all the depth of a normal empath,
Right.
but they also have this added layer of resilience and boundary setting.
Uh-huh. So it's not just about feeling everything super intensely.
Right.
It's about how you manage those emotions. That's where the super part comes in.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Think of it like this. A normal empath might absorb all the negativity around them.
Okay.
Like a sponge just soaking it all up. But a super empath, they've learned to shield themselves.
Yeah.
They can still be compassionate,
Right.
but they don't let themselves get overwhelmed by it.
That makes a lot of sense. That's a good analogy.
And it really challenges the way most people view empathy.
Right.
People often see it as a weakness, but for super empaths, it's a source of strength.
Okay, so they don't just get bogged down by all the heavy emotions around them.
Exactly. They're able to navigate those emotional waters a little more skillfully.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
So besides this resilience,
Yeah.
what else makes a super empath stand out?
Another big one is their ability to set really firm boundaries.
Okay.
Some empaths might struggle with that,
Right.
protecting their energy, you know?
Hmm.
But super empaths, they're masters of self-preservation. They really understand that you can't pour from an empty cup.
But isn't there a risk that they come across as distant or uncaring if they have such strong boundaries?
Yeah, that's a common misunderstanding.
Okay.
Super empaths, they're not cold or aloof at all. It's actually the opposite.
Okay.
They set those boundaries because they know that to truly help others, they need to protect their own well-being first.
Makes sense.
It's kind of like the whole put on your own oxygen mask
Right.
before assisting others on an airplane thing.
I see your point. So it's not about shutting people out. It's more about creating healthy limits to protect their own energy so they can actually help.
Exactly.
Okay, I get it. So we've got resilience and boundary setting.
Yes.
Anything else that's like a key trait of a super empath?
Well, this ties into the boundaries, actually. It's their authenticity.
Okay.
Super empaths, they really know who they are, what they stand for,
Right.
and they don't compromise on their values.
So they're not easily swayed by outside pressure or opinions?
Not at all. They really embrace their unique gifts.
Okay.
And they're not afraid to stand out from the crowd.
I like that. And the source material says that this makes them pretty much immune to manipulation,
That's what it says.
especially from people with narcissistic tendencies.
Especially from narcissists.
Oh, wait a minute. So super empaths are like kryptonite to narcissists.
Uh-huh. It's not quite that simple.
Okay.
But the source does describe this really interesting dynamic between them.
Okay, listening.
So you've got a narcissist who might initially be drawn to a super empath.
Right, because of their warmth and empathy.
Exactly. But then things can change pretty quickly.
How so? What happens?
Well, super empaths are really perceptive.
Okay.
And they just don't tolerate being mistreated.
Uh-huh.
They can see right through all those manipulative tactics.
Right.
And they're not afraid to call a narcissist out.
So those strong boundaries come into play in a big way here.
Oh, absolutely. It's a key part of the dynamic.
I see. So the narcissist is drawn to their light,
Yeah.
but then they just can't handle their strength.
You could put it that way.
Okay, that makes sense. So they don't need that external validation
Right.
or approval that a narcissist might try to use.
Exactly. They've got their own internal compass that's guiding them.
Right. And that makes them really hard to control or manipulate.
Exactly. And that can be super frustrating for a narcissist.
Yeah, I bet. So we've established that super empathy has some serious advantages.
Definitely.
How do you actually cultivate these gifts?
Okay.
Is it something you can develop, or are you just born with it?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right.
And it's one that we're going to explore a lot more as we go deeper into this.
All right, I'm ready to dive in. Okay, so someone wants to actually cultivate these super empath traits. Where do they even begin?
Right.
Is there a secret formula or something?
Well, unfortunately, no magic potions.
Okay.
But the source does have some practical tips for nurturing these qualities.
I am listening.
It all starts with self-care.
Okay, self-care.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
But for someone who's always absorbing everybody else's energy,
Right.
self-care probably looks a little different.
Totally. So what are we talking about here? What kind of activities would be good?
Well, the source suggests things like meditation,
Okay.
spending time in nature, journaling,
Right.
really anything that allows them to disconnect from all that external stimuli
Okay.
and just recharge their emotional batteries.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense, especially for someone who's really sensitive to their surroundings. It's like creating that buffer,
Yeah,
that space to decompress.
totally. And speaking of creating space,
Okay.
another super crucial aspect is boundary setting.
Oh, yeah, the boundaries. We touched on this earlier,
We did.
but I'm guessing it's a little more nuanced than just saying no.
Oh, for sure. It's about learning to recognize those situations
Okay.
where you feel your energy being drained
Right.
or, your boundaries are being crossed.
Mm-hmm.
And then the most important part,
What's that?
having the courage to communicate your needs clearly
Okay.
and assertively.
I feel like that's where it gets tricky for a lot of people,
Right.
especially people who are naturally empathetic.
Yeah,
You want to help.
you do.
You want to please others.
Exactly. But the source actually gives us some helpful phrases
Okay, good.
that super empaths can use in those situations.
I'm all ears.
So, for example, instead of just saying yes to a request right away,
Right.
they might say something like, let me think about that and get back to you.
Okay, that's good.
Or if somebody's pushing their boundaries, they might say, I understand how you feel, but I need some space right now.
Oh, I like that I'm writing these down.
Good.
It's interesting how these small phrases
Yeah,
can make such a big difference in setting those boundaries.
they really can.
Okay. So we've got self-care, we've got boundaries. What else does the source recommend for kind of nurturing those super empath skills?
Well, another key ingredient is embracing authenticity.
Okay.
We talked about how super empaths are naturally self-aware. They're
Right.
confident in who they are.
Mm-hmm.
They're not trying to fit into any mold.
So it's about owning those unique gifts
Exactly.
and letting your true self shine.
I love that.
Do you think this ties back to the whole narcissist kryptonite thing?
You might.
Like maybe narcissists are drawn to that authentic energy,
Yeah.
but then they can't handle it
Uh-huh.
when it doesn't fit their expectations.
That's a really interesting connection
Yeah.
because narcissists often thrive on control and validation. So someone who's completely comfortable in their own skin
Mm-hmm.
can be both alluring
Right.
and threatening
Interesting.
to them.
Yeah, it's like you can't dim someone's light
Yeah.
by trying to outshine them.
Right.
Super empaths, they just keep shining,
Yeah.
no matter what.
And finally, the source really emphasizes the importance of channeling that empathy
Okay.
effectively.
So it's not enough to just feel deeply.
Right.
It's about using those insights to make a positive impact.
You got it.
But how do super empaths actually do that?
Well, they often do really well in roles where they can use their intuition
Okay.
and their compassion to help others.
Hmm.
Think about therapists,
Okay.
teachers,
Yeah.
social workers. these kinds of professions where empathy is a core strength.
Makes sense.
Right.
They're naturally able to connect with people on a deeper level.
Yeah.
So those roles seem like a natural fit.
They do. But it's not just limited to career choices.
Right.
Super empaths can make a difference in their communities, their families, their friendships, just by being present, supportive, understanding. They might volunteer their time, advocate for social justice, or just be a listening ear for someone who needs it.
So it's about taking that feeling and turning it into doing, making a real difference in the world around them.
Yeah.
It's like they're channeling all that emotional energy outward, almost like a superpower.
I like that analogy. It's about recognizing the power of empathy to connect us, to heal us, and to inspire positive change.
I love that. It's really challenging the way we typically think about empathy.
It is.
Instead of seeing it as a burden or a weakness,
right,
we can start to see it as a strength, as a gift.
Yeah.
Maybe even as a superpower.
Exactly. And just like any superpower, it takes practice and intention to master it.
So are you saying that anyone can become a super empath?
Well, based on what we've talked about today, I think the answer is yes.
Wow.
The source material seems to say that these traits...
Like resilience, boundary setting, authenticity.
Right. They're not just for a select few. They're skills that we can all cultivate and strengthen with practice.
So even if someone doesn't necessarily identify as a super empath, they could still benefit from developing these qualities.
Exactly. And it really aligns with the idea that empathy itself is not fixed. It's like a muscle that you can strengthen over time.
I love that analogy.
The more you practice, the more developed it becomes.
Okay. So we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
We've looked at the 9 traits of a super empath. We talked about their dynamic with narcissists.
Yeah.
And we even learned some tips for cultivating those qualities.
Right.
It's been quite a deep dive.
It has. And I think the main takeaway here...
What's that?
...is that empathy is powerful.
Okay.
And it's something that we can all tap into more fully.
Yeah, whether or not we consider ourselves a super empath.
Okay. That's such a good point. It really makes you think about empathy in a whole new way.
It does.
Yeah.
And this source material kind of hints at this idea. That we all have some level of empathy within us. It's a part of what makes us human.
Right.
The real question is, how do we nurture that?
Okay.
How do we make it stronger?
Right.
And how do we use it to make a positive difference?
So we're not just talking about super empaths here.
No, not at all.
It's more about the potential that exists in all of us.
Exactly.
Okay. That's pretty inspiring. But, if we could all cultivate those super empath qualities, even just a little bit, what kind of impact could that actually have on the world?
That's the big question, right?
Yeah. I mean, it sounds a bit idealistic.
It does sound idealistic.
Yeah.
But think about it this way.
Okay.
What if more people really listened to each other?
Okay.
Like actively listened, set healthy boundaries in their relationships.
Right.
And approach those disagreements with more understanding.
Instead of judgment? Don't you think that would lead to better conversations?
It probably would.
Stronger relationships, and maybe even more effective ways of tackling those big global challenges we're facing.
I see what you mean. So it's like those individual acts of empathy.
Right.
They can create this ripple effect that influences everyone around us.
It does.
And ultimately shapes the kind of world that we live in.
That's the idea. And according to the source, that's where the true power of super empathy lies.
Okay.
It's not some kind of mystical ability.
Right.
It's the potential it has to spark a collective change.
I see.
Starting with one compassionate act at a time.
So it's not just about feeling things deeply. It's about doing something with that empathy.
Yes. It's about taking action.
Putting it into practice in our everyday life.
Exactly. And the more we do that, the stronger that empathy muscle becomes.
Okay.
And the more we contribute to a world where understanding and compassion are just the norm.
I like that. This has been such an incredible deep dive.
It really has.
I feel like I've learned so much about the power of empathy.
Me too.
And its potential to create a more connected and compassionate world.
Absolutely. And I hope our listeners feel inspired to really explore their own relationship with empathy and see how they can cultivate these qualities in their own lives.
Absolutely. So whether you feel like a super empath or not, we've all gained some valuable insights today.
I think so.
And some practical tips to get us started on that journey.
For sure.
Thanks for joining us on this amazing exploration of super empathy.